The Bahia de Darwin was also doomed, but not yet ready for a star by her name. It would be 5 more sundowns before her engines quit forever, and 10 more years before she sank to the ocean floor. She was not only the newest and largest and fastest and most luxurious cruise ship based in Guayaquil, she was the only one designed specifically for the Galapagos tourist trade, whose destiny, from the moment her keel was laid, was understood to be a steady churning out to the islands and back again, out to the islands and back again. She was built in Malmo, Sweden, where I myself worked on her. It was said by the skeleton crew of Swedes and Ecuadorians who delivered her from Malmo to Guayaquil that a storm she passed through in the North Atlantic would be the last rough water or cold weather she would ever know. She was a floating restaurant and lecture hall and nightclub and hotel for 100 paying guests. She had radar and sonar, and an electronic navigator which gave continuously her position on the face of the earth to the nearest 100 meters. She was so thoroughly automated that a person all alone on the bridge with no one in the engine room or on deck could start her up, hoist her anchor, put her in gear, and drive her off like a family automobile. She had 85 flush toilets and 12 bidets, and telephones in the staterooms and on the bridge which, via satellite, could reach other telephones anywhere. She had television, so people could keep up with the news of the day. Her owners, a pair of old German brothers in Quito, boasted that their ship would never be out of touch with the rest of the world for an instant. Little did they know. She was 70 meters long. The ship on which Charles Darwin was the unpaid naturalist, the Beagle, was only 28 meters long. When the Bahia de Darwin was launched in Malmo, 1,100 metric tons of salt water had to find someplace else to go. I was dead by then. When the Beagle was launched in Falmouth, England, only 215 metric tons of salt water had to find someplace else to go. The Bahia de Darwin was a metal motor ship. The Beagle was a sailboat made out of trees and carried 10 cannons for repelling pirates and savages. The 2 older cruise ships with which the Bahia de Darwin was meant to compete had gone out of business before the struggle could begin. Both had been booked to capacity for many months to come, but then because of the financial crisis, they had been swamped with cancellations. They were anchored in backwaters of the marshland now, out of sight of the city, and far from any road or habitation. Their owners had stripped them of their electronic gear and other valuables in anticipation of a prolonged period of lawlessness. Ecuador, after all, like the Galapagos Islands, was mostly lava and ash, and so could not begin to feed its 9 million people. It was bankrupt, and so could no longer buy food from countries with plenty of topsoil. So the seaport of Guayaquil was idle, and the people were beginning to starve to death. Business was business. Neighboring Peru and Colombia were bankrupt too. The only ship at the Guayaquil waterfront, other than the Bahia de Darwin, was a rusty Colombian freighter, the San Mateo, stranded there for want of the means to buy food or fuel. She was anchored offshore and had been there so long that an enormous raft of vegetable matter had built up around her anchor line. A baby elephant might have reached the Galapagos Islands on a raft that size. Mexico and Chile and Brazil and Argentina were likewise bankrupt, and Indonesia and the Philippines and Pakistan and India and Thailand and Italy and Ireland and Belgium and Turkey. Whole nations were suddenly in the same situation as the San Mateo, unable to buy with their paper money and coins or their written promises to pay later even the barest essentials. Persons with anything life-sustaining to sell, fellow citizens as well as foreigners, were refusing to exchange their goods for money. They were suddenly saying to people with nothing but paper representations of wealth, "Wake up, you idiots! Whatever made you think paper was so valuable?" There was still plenty of food and fuel and so on for all the human beings on the planet, as numerous as they had become, but millions upon millions of them were starting to starve to death now. The healthiest of them could go without food for only about 40 days, and then death would come. And this famine was as purely a product of oversized brains as Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It was all in people's heads. People had simply changed their opinions of paper wealth, but for all practical purposes, the planet might as well have been knocked out of orbit by a meteor the size of Luxembourg.